Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in securing cyberspace. With me today on the show are Lieutenant General Edward Cardon, the commander for U.S. Army Cyber Command and 2nd Army, Jeff Eisensmith, the Chief Information Security Officer, Department of Homeland Security, Brigadier General Maria Barrett, the Deputy Commander, Operations for the Cyber National Mission Forces, Richard Hale, the Deputy Chief Information Officer for Cybersecurity Department of Defense, Ralph Kahn, the VP of Federal at Tanium, and John Davis, the VP and Federal Chief Security Officer at Palo Alto Networks. Let's get into talking about cybersecurity, folks. Well, it certainly is not a topic that's not on the front burners. I mean, we've certainly had our share of cybersecurity issues showing up in the papers every time you open it up. So let's talk about what's going on out there in your areas. Let's start with Brigadier General Maria Barrett. Brigadier General, give us some examples of areas where you are making some progress with cybersecurity initiatives at your agency.
Sure, Jim. I think probably the biggest thing I'd like to highlight is we are halfway through the build of the cyber mission forces. So that's approximately 6,200 individuals and 133 teams. So what we're really focusing on now moving forward is going beyond the build, taking that capacity and the capability of those teams and employing them to reach operational outcomes. I think part of how we're going to do that, too, is really exciting, and it's through the partnerships, kind of exemplified by this panel. That's partnerships with federal agencies, industry, academia, and our international partners.
Takes everybody, doesn't it?
It really does. And probably the third piece that's just kicking off this year is the DoD Cyber Culture and Compliance Initiative. It's 10 tasks just kicking off, but what we realized was 80% of the cyber incidents in the Department of Defense really are preventable.
Wow.
It's done through poor practices by users, poor practices in network architecture, poor practices in management. And so if we can just get after that, that might take a lot of workload off of us. Yeah,
actually, very good point. Working on the culture issue, because, I guess when it comes to cybersecurity, it's everybody's responsibility in the organization. Another thing, you brought it up, but what I love about the show is we always wind up with people meeting each other that have been working with each other or need to work with each other and have a chance to spend a little time together. So it's sort of a side benefit. Jeff Eisensmith over at DHS. Jeff, give us some examples of areas where you think you're making some good progress at DHS and some of your cybersecurity initiatives.
So I guess the place I'll start off will be last year we had the cyber sprint coming out of OMB.
Right.
And that was a major push. And what we really found out was with that very focused ask and the national drive, leadership got behind it 100%, and DHS responded wonderfully. So we really were able to hit that out of the park. And on the heels of that, we've had a number of cyber orders internal to DHS, which have been a focus area, helped the department with its diverse mission really get behind the cyber mission. That's given us a lot of traction. That and programs like continuous diagnostics and mitigation.
Sure.
This is the year that's going to come in. We were about as heterogeneous as a department can be. And after CDM is done, my expectation is we will have a common stripe across the department that we can defend much, much better.
Yeah, excellent. One thing about cybersecurity is it never ends. It's not like you're done. You know what I mean? You keep working things, but every day there are new threats, new complexities, new things. I know we have a radio show coming up on the Internet of Things, and I begin thinking to myself some of the cyber threats that we're going to be looking at when we get there and things like that. John Davis over at Palo Alto Networks. John, tell us how Palo Alto is positioning to support your customer base and to help agencies move forward with cybersecurity initiatives.
Sure, Jim. I like to think of the progress that we're making in terms of people, process, and technology. And since Palo Alto Networks is a technology company, I'll start with that first. We've seen great progress in terms of both what we're doing and the support we're providing in taking an integrated platform approach to the cyber threat problem and using it in a zero trust environment. So what does that mean? That means that you have to have endpoint security and not just fixed. You also have to, this growing reliance on mobile devices. So you have to take an approach where you can provide security at the endpoint, network security using next generation technology, because what used to work in terms of just traffic coming to and from certain bad locations, that doesn't work anymore. Yeah. Nowadays, you have to take a look at the applications people use, and you have to be able to look at the content that they use. And then finally, the intelligence and analytics that feed that entire process. So that's what we mean by an integrated platform approach. In terms of processes, intelligence and information sharing, absolutely key, and so are partnerships. No organization can do it on its own. In fact, we partner with Tanium, we partner with Splunk, we partner with Forescout, and we partner with many of our competitors in this thing called the Cyber Threat Alliance so that we share information on a wider scale about what's happening in the threat environment. And lastly, people, starting with leadership. We partnered with the New York Stock Exchange, created a book for C-suite executives and their staffs called Navigating the Digital Age, published that in October, and setting an example of a prevention-oriented mindset, and in terms of hiring people with great talent, and training and education. Absolutely great progress that we're seeing in terms of training and education. Yeah, and that collaboration, I think you're hitting right on things. That is so important. And then, working with those that in some cases are competitors. I mean, it's going to take that. I mean, it's going to take solutions that are going to be made up of, multi-dimensional arrays of products that some will be competitors, some will be standalone solutions and so forth. Lieutenant General Ed Cardon, tell us a little bit about what's happening over U.S. Army and some of the progress you're making over there with some of your major cyber initiatives.
Well, thanks, Jim. So I'd say first, the network modernization effort ongoing as part of the Joint Information Environment is changing the entire back end of the Army, from the tactical to the enterprise level. So building on what everyone has talked about here, it's not just the technology, but it's how we organize to better defend our networks. That's the first big piece. The second big one is the development of our Cyber Center of Excellence that works the doctrine, organization, concepts, and training. And the reason that's important, what we've done inside the Army is we've actually created a cyber branch. And we did that to better manage our people, to manage the talent. And I think when all this coming together, we're going to be able to much better defend our networks and provide options to combatant commanders. Yeah, it's amazing how far it's come, and just all the cybersecurity and the cyber commands that have grown up over the years. I know, going back to my years, which date back now to beyond 10 years, but it was like what's NSA going to do, what's NIST going to do, what's whatever going to do. Now we've got pretty much everybody and every agency has some role and has some organization in place that is dealing with this issue because it has become such a highly critical matter. Ralph Kahn over at Tanium, tell us a little bit about how Tanium plays in this space. How do you guys support the customer, and what are the kinds of things you're doing to help move some of these cybersecurity initiatives forward?
So from our perspective, one of the largest problems facing customers in general, Department of Defense, or any commercial customer is what I'll call the cycle time problem. Our adversaries are attacking in seconds and minutes, and the systems that we have in place can't react that fast. We can't acquire that fast. We can't evaluate technology that fast, and we can't detect that fast. And so the area we're really focused on is reducing that cycle time for our customers. If our customers can begin to defend themselves and make changes to their IT infrastructure in hours or days instead of months or years, then I think we're in a much better position to defend against the adversaries that face us, and we increase the cost significantly to the adversaries. Right now, the cost is pretty low. The higher we increase the cost, the more of a deterrence it is to a lot of different adversaries. Some specific areas that we're actually helping the government The Air Force embarked on an effort called ARAD that's designed to do something very similar to this. So we're working actively with the Air Force on that. We're engaged with many of the services, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, in various different components. We're engaged with civilian agencies as well. And most of those efforts involve starting with the baseline. One of the biggest problems CIOs and CISOs have today is that their systems of records aren't giving them timely and accurate information. The information they get back may be 80% complete, even though it's reporting 100% complete, and the data they get back may be a week old, even though they're thinking maybe it was yesterday, right?
So damage is already happening.
Right, and so one of the biggest goals we have is working first with agencies and departments to help them get better data and get it quickly. So get authoritative data, get it quickly, and reduce the cycle times to make the decisions you need to make to defend yourself. Yeah,
excellent point. You made, Ralph, some great points there. I actually participated in a webinar not too far back about living in a new world in the future where time is approaching zero when you're talking about decision making. The bad guys are not going to give you a warning. I mean, when it hits. So we're approaching a time where decision-making equals zero. So it's going to be an interesting world we live in. Richard Hale over DOD. Richard, welcome back to the show. Tell us about some of the progress that you've been making over at DOD and some of your initiatives around cybersecurity.
So I'd like to go back to a couple of points folks have made already. I think we're making progress on this business of focusing on the preventable vulnerabilities and actually preventing them. So we've gone back through the last 5 years worth of incident data from both government and industry. So we have strong sharing programs with the defense industry and others. We have tried to look at what vulnerabilities are exploited by a bad guy at each step in an attack. And then we tried to look at, okay, what do we need to do to prevent each of those steps from working, or at least a few of those steps from working, maybe not all of them. And so we came up with a fairly short list of things that needed to be done, which are closely related to the CIO of the federal government's list of cybersecurity priorities. We called it the Cybersecurity Discipline Implementation Plan. It was signed out by the Secretary. At the same time, we were also trying to figure out how to attack this culture problem more deeply. The Secretary signed out the cyber culture and compliance initiatives. So those set our priorities right now. And we're starting to make progress in working off some of these preventable things.
Great.
So that's
so you got the plan in place, and now you just work your way through.
And now we're doing it. And the other thing that we're doing is trying to measure how we're doing every month. And we're trying to measure it a couple of different ways. So in DoD, the cybersecurity business is about dependable mission execution in the face of cyber warfare by a capable adversary. We have all kinds of other goals that are subordinate to that. We want to be able to keep secrets. We want to be able to have maneuver forces, but we want dependable mission execution at the end of the day. So we're trying to measure progress both by organization to help with the culture piece of this. The chain of command has to be involved. But we're also trying to measure by mission. We're just starting that. We're not sure exactly how to do that, so we've picked a few important missions and we've begun measuring. But I think we're starting to make progress there in understanding how vulnerable a particular mission is to cyber warfare by a capable adversary.
Excellent. Good ideas. I think you're right. If you can't measure it, how do you know if you're making progress? Lieutenant General Ed Cardon, what are some of the lessons you're learning as you work your way through this? It's a complex world out there. What kind of lessons would you pass on to others that are trying to work these same issues?
Well, picking up where Richard was there, I would say one of the first ones is this culture change. And for a long time, it was viewed as cybersecurity, that's a G6 or CIO problem and not an operator problem. And now, given the nature and the character of the networks we have today and the importance for mission assurance, it's now an operator problem. That's the first big one.
Excellent point.
The second one is you can't defend everywhere, so you have to pick where you really want to defend, and this goes to what Richard's talking about, what are those critical mission areas? We often call it cyber key terrain. What is the key terrain that must be defended? And then how exactly are you doing that? And then the final thing I think that I often describe cyber as a form of maneuver, and our networks, systems, and data are warfighting platforms. And if we start to approach them in that way, at least from the Army and Department of Defense, we're going to be in a much better place than looking at it as a service.
That's a very good point, an excellent point. And we've been hearing that in the news lately, too, that it's no longer, cybersecurity is no longer just, a term different from warfare. Cybersecurity is becoming warfare. Jeff Eisensmith, Jeff, what are some of the lessons you're learning along the way here as you work your way through the daily grinds of cybersecurity initiatives?
Let me go back to what Richard said. One of the hardest things we have to do as security professionals is the measurement part. If you're always going into leadership saying, hey, we just got tipped over, then the only measure they have is how many times you come into their office telling them that you have had a problem.
Uh-oh, Jeff's here.
Yes,
something bad's going to happen.
That's really bad thing. So for us, the big thing we're going for now is how do we get meaningful metrics? For us, we're working on the kill chain. Right, so the model we use is 7 distinct links, and it's great to be able to say, with this particular type of actor, which may be very advanced, how many links are we holding on at any given time? So that does a few things. One, it is really a meaningful metric that shows how your defense is going in the face of different types of actors. And the other one is, it's great because when you can always point to one link being broken, it builds its own business case for investment into leadership to say, here is a weakness that has become systemic. We must make an investment now.
Right.
And for business and for security people like me to be able to create that business case meaningfully from metrics we're capturing daily, that's a big one. Absolutely,
yeah. And of course, the bad guys are always looking for the weakest link. I mean, they're going to, if they can't get there one way, they'll try another. Brigadier General Barrett, what are some of the lessons you're learning along the way as you struggle and work your way through all the various issues you deal with on a day-to-day basis with cybersecurity issues?
This is probably a never-ending challenge, but the lesson learned of information sharing. And so as we talk about these partnerships and in an effort that is very intelligence-driven, how do you share the information that you have, or how do you gain the information that other people have, and do that in a way that is acceptable? So, when we're operating, the way that an IT security company may go about looking at a problem set, and the way that law enforcement, FBI might do it, and the way that we might do it, how do we combine that and learn from that? One of the things we have learned, though, is wherever possible, we need to use existing processes. No need to reinvent the wheel. So if there is a national response framework for incident response or defense support to law enforcement, we're going to leverage that and just make sure that we're doing it in a timely manner. So that's our first lesson learned. And I think the second biggest lesson learned is, I talked about these teams that we're building, and I think this is applicable to anybody with an IT workforce, is you have to keep up. The adversary is always changing, and we really have to make investments in how they train. And so a persistent training environment is really critical. We have some bright individuals on our teams, and they are very quickly learning at a rate that will exceed our training environment, and so we have to keep up for that and make sure that their skills remain top-notch. And I think that's probably something that everybody here at this table probably struggles with.
Yeah, as I mentioned, 19 years ago, I began teaching Cybersecurity 101, and back then, the class would be, half filled up, whatever. Now, the classes are packed. I mean, you can't get in, and so, which I think is a good thing. but it still just tells you how far we've come along. I want to hear from our other guest on this same same question about lessons learned, but we first need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Lieutenant General Edward Cardon from the U.S. Army Cyber Command, Jeff Eisensmith from Homeland Security, Brigadier General Maria Barrett from the Cyber National Mission Forces, Richard Hale from Department of Defense, Ralph Kahn from Tanium, and John Davis from Palo Alto Networks. We're talking cybersecurity. When we went to break, we were talking about lessons learned. We did not hear from Richard Hale. Richard, what are some of the lessons you're learning along the way as you work your way through some of these cybersecurity matters?
So first, I'd like to say I like all the lessons that other folks have described, and just a couple other points for people who are trying to do this business. Okay. I think a thing that industry is figuring out and that we in the government are starting to figure out is that the most senior leader in an organization must make this a priority or it's not going to happen.
Excellent point.
So the scorecard that I mentioned earlier is given to the Secretary of Defense every month. So he looks at it and then he discusses it at a staff meeting with his most senior staff, the military services, the undersecretaries, the chairman, the vice chairman. So this gets senior management attention, and there is some detail there about how we're doing in different areas. So they can talk about what they want to do to make the numbers better. Another one is this business in DoD of trying to get some of these basics done has been challenging, and we finally figured out, we cybersecurity people, that we created two castes of people, one cybersecurity people and another the IT workforce, and they cannot be different. So you may need some people who specialize in cybersecurity, but everybody in the IT workforce has a cybersecurity job. So we're going through and trying to be clear about those, make sure people are trained to do those, make sure they're qualified to do those, so that it isn't the cybersecurity people somehow doing stuff that only IT people can do.
Excellent.
So that's another lesson. And then one more is engineering certain things about cybersecurity is very hard to do in hundreds of different places. And we, DoD, are big, and we have hundreds of places that engineer IT and systems. So we've been trying to centralize certain things more. So the engineering, for instance, of our upcoming Windows 10 deployment, tried to engineer the image with the top, say, 50 applications on it centrally. The military services, NSA, DISA, and Microsoft, for instance, have all thrown in on that so that we have a better chance of getting a properly configured computer out there in the DoD somewhere amongst the 5 million or so computers
Right.
that we run.
Right.
And that we can patch that thing automatically, and we can have things on that computer that sense its state automatically, so we know what's going on better.
Nothing like building security in up front and getting that requirement done up front. Ralph Kahn, what do you think are some of the lessons you're seeing as you work your way through this? What are some of the big things that jump out that you would say to somebody, when you get into this stuff, take a look and watch out for these things?
So I'll kind of emphasize one of the things I just heard Richard say, which is something that we refer to as security ops. As IT has evolved and cybersecurity has evolved, the missions and responsibilities of those two groups have become closer and closer together to the point where they're interdependent. Mm-hmm. And if you don't look at them as one organization working together, fighting one fight, you're going to create stovepipes, and that's going to create issues. So the fact that our customers are looking at that is an important lesson to be learned. That's also something we see a lot in the commercial world as a best practice. Another area that I think we can talk about as best practice is baselining first. Again, going back to something Richard said about compliance, the first thing you have to do when you want to know if you're compliant is figure out, okay, am I getting good data? Am I getting it quickly? So if you can take compliance from an annual exercise like a CCRI or a FISMA audit and turn it into something that's done every morning by a commander at their desk, you've made huge progress. Because when a commander comes in every morning or a manager in the civilian agencies, they need to know what the status is. If they're not compliant, they need to know what the risks are, and they need to know what they're doing about it. And so moving more quickly towards an environment where you can get compliance every day when you walk in the door, that's going to require cooperation between those groups, and it's going to require a new kind of mindset from IT operators.
Yeah. Excellent points. These are kind of like new concepts coming out of here about how getting these groups work together. I remember, years ago, the cybersecurity guy was usually the guy that was seen as says no, the guy that said, well, we can't do that because we can't do that because, well, nowadays, I think things have changed dramatically. Now I think everybody needs to say, wait a minute, we need to find out how to get this done because the bad guys are figuring out how to get the things done. So it really has changed quite a bit. John Davis over at Palo Alto, what do you think are some of the lessons you're learning along the way here as you work through these issues?
Sure, Jim. Lots of lessons, but one of the most powerful lessons we've learned is that information sharing about cyber threats can create a powerful, powerful advantage. I talked a few minutes ago about the Cyber Threat Alliance. So this is Palo Alto Networks, Symantec, Intel Security, and Fortinet. 4 competitors. Those are the original founding members. There are 4 other contributing members now. Mm-hmm. Competitors in the cybersecurity industry that have made a decision at the CEO level that they're not going to compete on information. They're not going to treat information about cyber threats as a commercial commodity. They're going to treat it as a public good. And so the neat thing about this alliance is the organizations in the alliance must contribute 1,000 unique pieces of malware per day into the pot. And the other unique thing is that they have to automatically, all members have to automatically load those malware signatures into their defensive postures. So what this does is create as this alliance grows, it can create an organization, kind of a self-learning organization that we figured that by the time we get about 50 companies to join this, every person on the globe will be covered by someone. And as a threat is discovered, it's automatically loaded into the defensive posture. And what we hope to do is get rid of a lot of the ash and trash, more routine cyber threats, so we can focus on the really tough ones. Excellent points.
I remember the days where no one wanted to share anything. And I also remember when we first started talking about information sharing back with the early days of Homeland Security, people thought it was such an easy thing to do. Oh, information sharing, big deal. But when you get into really looking and peeling that onion back, there's a lot of complexities built in there, and there's royalty issues and proprietary issues, and obviously, banks are a little bit concerned about talking about vulnerabilities, and as there are financial institutions and so forth. So it really does change the complexity of the issue. But some of these stories sound absolutely phenomenal in terms of the way industry is coming together to really recognize the fact that this needs to be done.
And Jim, the legislation that was just recently passed supports this kind of information sharing environment.
That's great to hear too. Hey, Jeff Eisensmith, what are some of your priorities for the year? What are you going to be doing the next 12 months here? I have a feeling you've got 1 or 2 or 2,550 things on your agenda. Which ones would you say are some of the higher priorities?
I would say the higher priorities would be to get continuous monitoring, continuous monitoring and mitigation piece done within the department, and that's going to be done by the end of the summer of 2016. And that's just phase 1. Phase 2 is coming shortly after that, and we're already started moving in phase 2 technology into the department now. We'll certainly keep on moving into the cloud. We are one of the FedRAMP tri-chairs,
right?
DoD, DHS, and GSA. And finding a way to do that that's robust, meaning mostly, how do I build a defense in depth that includes my cloud environment? Because, time to market and the overall production costs, the O&M costs are falling through the floor when you get to the cloud, but you have to do it in a secure way.
Right. I know everybody was freaked out about cloud and security in the early days, but now when you actually take a look at it, cloud is a real opportunity because it's an opportunity to get a better hold on what is your portfolio of assets, what are your portfolio of applications and programs you have, and if you can begin consolidating them and coordinating them and putting them into a nice cloud environment, you now have the ability to look at it as a holistic approach to security as opposed to Band-Aid approaches on every one of these products. So I do see it as a major opportunity. Major General Barrett, what do you think are some of the priorities on your plate for the upcoming year?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is finishing the build of the teams. So we're in the last phase of it, and really what we're looking for is opportunities to accelerate that. When you build your first team, there's a lot of stuff that you don't know you run into and you have to work out. We know that now, and we should be able to accelerate these teams because they're in high demand, and not so much the teams themselves, but the capability. So that would be the other thing, is really developing a range of capabilities to offer both the commanders in the field and decision makers to respond to activities or to integrate into their operations. And so that will be the second biggest thing that we really want to push on this year, is just being able to deliver those outcomes in cyberspace. And probably the last thing, and it never escapes us, is just resourcing those capabilities.
Sure.
Will be top on our list.
Yeah, I'm sure that's always an issue. We haven't gotten to challenges, but money is always a challenge, no matter what subject we pick. But Richard Hale, what do you think are some of the priorities that are on your list for the year?
So to pile on to some of the priorities that have already been mentioned, a real priority for my office, but of the department, is this business of the culture change and getting the basics done. So those two things are most fundamental. And again, we have the secretary focused on these. A few other priorities are getting a better practical strategy in place for handling the cybersecurity of the Internet of Things. DoD went Internet of Things early, so we were early adopters of putting computers in everything. Anything that contains a computer is cyber attackable. Anything. And if it's a DoD thing, there's a significant possibility somebody is going to consider cyber attacking it. So we have this problem of making sure that the new stuff we produce has less vulnerability to this, and the problem of defending the existing stuff, for instance. And then we have a few workforce initiatives. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the information technology workforce. We also want to make sure that we have the right engineering workforce in place for the acquisition core in the department, so that they can make sure we're engineering cybersecurity into everything we build. Because again, nothing that we have anymore is analog. Everything has a computer, or a plane or a vehicle might have 100 or so computers in it.
Sure. Yes,
so those are all.
The cyber workforce will be a challenge today and into the future, as we have seen. Lieutenant General Cardon, what do you see as some of your priorities for the upcoming year?
So Jim, maybe I'll just highlight 5 of them. So the first one is a more defensible network through hardening, standardization, modernization, continuous monitoring, data analytics, and a lot of that's through the joint information environment being run by the DoD. The second priority is, of the teams that Maria was talking about, the Army's responsible for 41. We have 33 now, all 41 by summer. Got to go as fast as we can there. The third part is, how do you support the Army itself with cyber? And we're already running a series of experiments out at the National Training Center and Joint Readiness Training Center. The fourth one is training, and it's there's discussion on executive agent for training, and the Army's been very aggressive in setting up training environments, especially to train these teams. And then finally, to pick up on what Richard talked about, it's platform and mission assurance. What are we doing to better protect our systems, given the explosion in the recognition of platform vulnerabilities, the 60 Minutes piece, et cetera.
Yeah, excellent points. All 5 excellent points there. Thank you, and thanks for that succinct summary of those five issues. John Davis, Palo Alto, what do you think? What are some of the priorities on your list for the upcoming year?
Jim, I've got 4.
Okay.
First one is to help both public and private organizations establish a prevention-oriented mindset and security posture. And the notion here is, while detection and response and resilience, they're absolutely important, they're critical, but they're insufficient. We need to get ahead of this problem, and a prevention mindset is possible. Number 2, practice a zero-trust environment. And what this means is safely enabling organizations to do their missions, to do their business functions, by protecting the specific things that an organization needs to be able to do in order to accomplish that. Their applications that they need based on the users and the content that they're able to use. Number 3, employing an integrated platform approach. I've talked about that before, and the idea here is to be able to put controls across the entire threat life cycle, the stages that a threat goes through in order to get in and either exfiltrate information or cause harm or damage. There are stages involved in that, and so the integrated platform approach has got to be able to put controls in place across all of those stages. Right. And then finally, setting the example and even expanding on the intelligence analytic and information sharing partnerships that I spoke about before with the Cyber Threat Alliance. It's not just that. It's also supporting DoD with the Cybersecurity and Information Assurance Program for the Defense Industrial Base, and exploring relationships with information sharing relationships with DHS, being good partners and setting the example.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The public, the private partnerships and the analytics. We can do an entire show on analytics if we wanted to. Just talking about the analytics and big data and things along those lines. Let's talk about some of the challenges that we're facing, some of the more difficult challenges that you're facing in the upcoming years. Before we do that, I think, Ralph, I didn't pick up with you on priorities. Let's go first with Ralph at Tanium for your priorities for the year, then we'll switch it over to challenges.
So we've spent the last year working heavily with our customers to baseline to get them accurate information at speed and scale. And as we move out, we want to help them build on that baseline. We want them to be able to expand that capability to speed up the amount of time, to reduce the amount of time it takes them to detect a cyber threat, reduce the amount of time it takes them to take action on it, and give them verifiable, accurate, and fast data about what exactly is going on. We're very engaged from a partnership perspective. We're looking to build an environment with our customers where they can both provision new technologies, whether it be ours or somebody else's, instrument those technologies for operation, monitor them and measure them from a metrics perspective, and then deprovision them when it's time. And we want to reduce the cycle time of that from years to days. If the government decides they like a new security technology better, they ought to, within 24 or 48 hours, be able to take out the old thing and put in the new thing. And they ought to be able to measure it so that every month or every quarter or every week or whatever periodicity folks like General Cardon want to understand how the money they're spending is actually helping them, they can do that. That's what we're focused on this year.
Yeah, I've been challenging companies, that we've been doing this Band-Aid approach for so long, fixing things as they break, fixing it. Shouldn't someone be looking at, a holistic approach where we can deploy something and get rid of a lot of these things that have been around forever, that that we continually pay for on a day-to-day basis. We do need to switch over and talk about some challenges, and then talk about the future. The show's flying by here. We've got so much great content flying around here. So before we switch over to the challenges, we'll take our second short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Lieutenant General Edward Cardon from the U.S. Army Cyber Command, Jeff Eisensmith from Homeland Security, Brigadier General Maria Barrett from Cyber National Mission Forces, Richard Hale from the Department of Defense, Ralph Kahn from Tanium, and John Davis from Palo Alto, where we've been talking cybersecurity and getting an awful lot of content, and it's been going great. But before we switch over to the future, let's talk about some challenges, some of the hard stuff, the stuff that gets in the way. Brigadier General Maria Barrett, what's some of the challenges that you see as some of the things that are still you need to get out of the way before you're going to get to where you want to be with this?
So probably the biggest challenge, I mentioned the persistent training environment. There really is a need for a consistent training against a realistic simulated adversary for our folks. If you don't have that, their skills are going to atrophy. Mm-hmm. And it needs to keep up with their skills as they evolve, because we know that the threat is evolving. So that would be the second challenge, is really understanding the threat, making sure that we're adapting along with it and we're innovating ahead of it. A slight nuance to that, too, would also be for the industry partners, what is it that the teams will see in the environment that they work in? So if we do an incident response to a particular DoD organization and we bump into Palo Alto or Tanium, are we familiar with that product? Do we know how it works? Do we know how to leverage it in order to do our incident response? And then lastly, and this really goes to the heart of it, is the workforce. There is a competition for the talent. Talent being the military, the civilians, or our contractors. And we do have a few of those. So we do have to think about that. We don't have the same levers that industry might have to incentivize them. So hopefully they find our work exciting and worth pursuing, and that is a challenge that we face.
It's certainly a noble calling, and it's something that's important to the national security of our country. So I'm sure that appeals to a lot of individuals. Jeff Eisensmith, what do you think? What are some of the challenges, Jeff, that you face day to day that are still, the ones that you got to knock off and get out of the way before you get to where you really want to be?
Well, let me echo the fact workforce is going to be key to our success, and is also one of the hardest things we're going to have to succeed at. I would say legacy applications are really always going to be a challenge, and in the government, it's difficult for us to be able to retire legacy. Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of both the way the FAR is written as well as just the way the government operates. We are making headroads, but still, there has to be a consistent program to try and retire that legacy, which comes with a lot of vulnerabilities, and move towards a more modern way of doing it. The OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, and act. The adversaries are incredibly talented now, and they don't have to play by the rules.
Right.
And so, as a defender, you need to do things like use the kill chain so that the expense of every attack gets higher, right? And it takes a long time to take a workforce to be able to integrate that kill chain into how security operations works. But those are really the big rocks.
Absolutely. For me. Good points there. Lieutenant General Cardon, what do you think are some of the challenges that you face day to day that you still need to work your way through to get to really where you want to be with this?
So Jim, first, we've already talked a lot about culture, but next is adaptation. Adapting at the speed of technology, but also at the speed of the threat. I mean, it is a competitive space, so it's constantly evolving, and that leads me to the processes part. So it's just not the people, but how do you acquire stuff at the speed of technology, and then how do you ensure that you have the right workforce and that they're properly trained as you move? There's a big difference, for example, back into Cat5 cable, now to cloud technologies. That's right. Not the same. Right. And making that shift. And the last one, this is, I think, unique to the department, is the convergence of electronic warfare, telecommunications, intelligence. All these things are also becoming more integrated in the domain, and they're going to impact the way that we conduct operations.
Yeah, well said, well said. Richard Hale, I know sometimes with challenges, when you're the last one in the line of the government people, it's easy to say ditto. So rather than just go with challenges, I like to switch the question. since we're coming down now to the last segment of the show, I'd like to hear about all of the panelists' thoughts about where this is all going. What's the future look like? Today, I still hold the opinion that we are still, fixing things after they break. We still are, responding after the fact in a lot of cases. Not all, but some. Share your vision for the future. Are we going to get to a point where we're proactive enough to get out in front of these threats and prevent most of these cyber attacks from happening before they happen? What do you think, Richard?
Excellent question. So I'm an optimist, but I think some fundamental things need to change. So the way we teach engineering, the way we teach computer science have to change. We do not still teach for this new operational environment where everything is hooked to everything else. Computer science classes online look just the same as the ones that I took in college 100 years ago. So my future state is that we design and operate everything that contains a computer in a way that is sensitive to this gravity. Civil engineering, we have gravity in everything. In anything to do with computing, we have this environment that's not benign as the environment to which we have to design. So we do that, we change, and we make it so that everything is less vulnerable and more defensible. In DoD, we have a strong technical operational force that is agile and can stay ahead of adversaries, given that we've, by this point, gotten the basics done. We've gotten the design changes done, and the economics have changed, and attacks are much slower to develop, much more expensive to develop. Classes of adversaries have dropped out of the game. And then we're going to need that really capable workforce to understand what's going on with the adversaries that are left. And then we adopt new strategies like maneuvering faster than the attack development lifecycle, for instance, which is only going to be possible when we get some of these other things finished. And then we do these with partners. So again, every mission that the department does is teamed with industry, other government entities, coalition partners. And somehow, again, in this future state, we are all at this new, much more defensible level. We're sharing information very fast, and we're able to react faster than an adversary can.
Absolutely. Well said, well said. Ralph Kahn, what do you think, Tanium, what do you think? What's your crystal ball look like out there? I mean, are we making progress fast enough to get out in front of these threats? Are things going to get better here? What's your thoughts?
So, like the old Chinese proverb, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. We're making first step after first step. One of the things, Tanium is aiming for, and we're working very hard with our customers and our engineers on this, is creating a vision of the future that deals with the issues of speed and scale a lot more effectively. One of the biggest challenges when you do that is taking a workforce that is used to having it be okay to take a month or a week or a year to do something and helping them understand what the life and the world looks like when it's done in 15 seconds. And how does that impact your operations? What kinds of things are possible in the future that aren't? So, going back to the example I used before, we think before the end of this year, our customers will be able to instrument new security technologies, install them, measure them, and then de-instrument them in hours or days, which hasn't been heard of in the in the history of technology and the history of cybersecurity. That's where we believe the future is going. I agree with Richard in terms of there's a lot of fundamental change that needs to happen before our infrastructure gets more secure. But in the meantime, we need to be able to fight more effectively against our adversaries, and the key to that is being able to do what we do faster and at scale. Doing it quickly and small is relatively easy. Doing it at the scale of, say, the U.S. Army, that's another set of challenges. And those are the challenges that Tanium's aiming to solve.
Excellent points. Lieutenant General Cardon, what do you think it looks like out there in the future? How things going to change?
Well, since the offense has such an advantage over the defense, if we could get that more in balance, I think that would help. But cyber is going to be a part of military operations. And so I think we're still at the front edge of how exactly that looks and how we incorporate that in operations, both offensively and defensively. The second piece is partnerships in terms of information sharing. So, for example, sometimes the commercial space sees it before we do, since cyber is affecting us all. And then how do we best invest our money? And sometimes you hear the term work factor analysis. If you have a finite amount of money and you have this many problems, where do you invest to get the biggest improvement in your security?
Where do you draw that line?
And so if we could figure that out, I think as a department, we'd be in a much better position.
Excellent, excellent points. John Davis, Palo Alto, what do you think, John? What's it look like for you down the road? Are we getting out in front of these threats?
Well, Jim, I wouldn't be at Palo Alto Networks if I didn't believe we could make significant progress towards prevention.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
But I'd like to go back to what General Cardon said. In order to do that, we've got to flip this math problem that we've got right now, where the attacker has the advantage. Yeah. And it's getting cheaper and easier, and it's a marketplace for cyber threats. While the defense is, largely manual and very expensive. So there's no way we're going to hire enough people to get out of this problem. If you take a look, I think Cisco had a report, there are 16 billion devices connected to the internet today. By 2019, that's going to go up 55% to 29 billion. Wow. So the attack space is going to explode. We have to leverage technology to automate detection and response much more than we do today. And if we can do that and use people for what only people really do the best job at, I do think we can make significant progress.
Wow. It's amazing just how far we've come in a relatively short period of time when you think about it, from the day of the early PCs to the internet and DARPANet becoming the internet and so forth. Truly is amazing. Jeff Eisensmith, Jeff, what's the future look like for you, buddy? Are we going to get out in front of this stuff?
So I agree with everything that's been said prior to me, but I will say this in a very different vein. The future is going to be DevOps, right? So what do I mean by DevOps? That means creating programs in an agile method that are stateless, that are sitting in the cloud environment. If I have to make a change in production, I can do it in 10 minutes. Having software be so robust that I have chaos monkeys in my code randomly tearing down servers, and my code runs transparently to that. That exists in the department now, but not at the scale that I want it to be. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about how you defend, you've got to build that security internal to the application and make it extraordinarily robust. DevOps is that way forward. That's the way.
Great. I love hearing that. There's been so much talk about DevOps and so many definitions around it. That was very succinct the way you put it there in terms of a clear understanding of it. Major General Maria Barrett, where's this all going? What's this look like to you down the road? Do you have that confidence that we're going to get out there in front of this stuff? Prevent that, quote, digital Pearl Harbor day coming and things like that? How do you see this all working out?
Well, I think you're right to frame this in terms of a vision and what we need to be shooting for. And I'll go very high level on this is, we know we're not going to stop every attack from coming in, but we really need to start thinking about these things in terms of deterrence. Mm-hmm. So I'm a military person. So the concept of deterrence, does this look like it does in other military concepts? And so we've thought about that, and so what would convince our adversary that their attempts against our networks will be unsuccessful? And that's the big secure and defend piece that everybody else has been talking about. And then the other piece is what would convince our adversaries that the cost of doing these type of activities would be too high, and that's the attribution piece. And the response to that doesn't necessarily have to be cyber. Mm-hmm. But we do need to think about that from a Department of Defense and a whole of government standpoint of, imposing those costs, and there will be a response to if you have done something, we're gonna respond.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. It's time for us maybe to, you hit us, we hit back. Especially as we change the topic more towards cyber warfare as opposed to just cybersecurity per se. Let me try. We had such great content today. I'll tell you, boy, I was taking notes left and right here. Let me try to do some summary the best I can. I know when we talked progress, we talked about building out those cyber mission forces. We're continuing to build them out. The cyber sprint we talked about being a very successful, something that moved along quite well. We're not just talking technology. We need organization. We need planning. We need strategy. We need culture change. We talked about the fact that cycle time are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's going to be a bigger and bigger and bigger challenge because we don't have days or weeks to respond to these attacks. In some cases, we have no warning whatsoever. And we talked about the need to measure progress. How do we know we're actually getting things done if we have no real way to measure that progress? When we talked about lessons learned, I heard a lot again about culture change, that cybersecurity is going to take everyone. It's not going to be any one person at this table or any one company out there listening on the radio that's going to, fix this problem. This is going to be a problem that's going to take private-public partnerships. It's going to take information sharing. It's going to be it's going to be competitors sharing information with one another, and so forth. We heard again about metrics. Something that came up again and again for me, and I wrote it down a number of times, is that idea of information sharing. I mean, that's come up over and over again. How important the information sharing piece will be for everything that we're doing here. And we did hear, too, that leadership needs to be involved. Everybody sitting at this table, is quite competent, knows what they're doing, can get the job done. But boy, you need somebody to cover your back too, because you're going to have to push, and it's going to be some real challenges along the way. Priorities: we heard about getting CDM done. We heard about defense and Dept with the cloud. We heard about getting these teams built out, the culture change, the public-private partnerships, and we talked a little bit about analytics. We didn't get into it in detail, but the fact is there's a lot of analytics involved in this. And in the future, the information sharing came out again, cycle time, DevOps, and the agility with that, and agile development, and resiliency to be able to respond. With that, I want to first thank our panelists for taking time from your busy schedules to be here. I want to thank our sponsors, without which we wouldn't have a show. I want to thank Federal News Radio and all the great people here for the great facilities they provide us. And of course, most importantly, I want to thank our listening audience out there in the public. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.